Hello and welcome to lecture number 19 of this series. And today's lecture will be about probably the most fascinating category in aroma chemicals and natural materials for that matter, called musks. Now, musks are interesting because they have a remarkable odor profile, they have a remarkable effect on fragrance, they have a remarkable history full of accident and actually brilliance in chemistry. And they are also the most talked about in many ways because of the supposedly sexual attractant aspect of musks, which I personally doubt very much, but which is very much part of their folklore. So what I have in front of me today are 5 musks that come from the animalic part of the perfumery kit, and they're in historical order pretty much here. The first one is ethylene brassylate, which is a synthetic musk from the 1940s, I believe. The second one is ambretolide, which is found in a plant. The third one is muscinone, which is a famous molecule resembling the natural musk of musk deer. And then there is habanolide, and the last one is romandolide, which belongs to a completely novel category of musks, which I will talk about in lecture number 20. So all of these molecules have in common what's called the musk odor character. And musk odor character is not easy to describe. It's powdery, sweet, pleasant, smooth, somewhat oily in some ways, depending on which musk. In the case of muscinone, less sweet. And in the case of habanolide, slightly harsher. So first of all, we have to define what animalic actually means. Does it mean something that comes from an animal? If that's so, then, for example, ambretolide does not come from an animal. It comes from the seeds of a plant, Muscus moscatus, which, as its name indicates, is a musky plant. And many now come from chemistry. They're no longer extracted from musk. But nevertheless, the original musk came from the musk deer, and the musk deer secretes it and stores it in a pouch near its anus as an attractant. So what's peculiar about the idea of having animalic materials is that you expect them to smell animalic. In other words, you expect them to smell kind of like somewhere between dirty hair and the giraffe cage at the zoo or something, I don't know, some rich, raunchy, slightly unpleasant smell. And some of them do, but not musks. In fact, musks smell very perfumey. And if you smell deer musk, the original, which is not so easy these days because, first of all, the deer musk is, thank God, protected. I mean, the musk deer is protected. When you smell that stuff, it basically smells really nice. It smells like fragrance. And it makes you think, well, maybe the musk deer are using it kind of the way we use fragrance. So there's a paradox here that the musk deer works extremely hard to, so to speak, perfume itself pleasantly to attract the other sex of the species, on the one hand. And on the other hand, when we use that particular perfume that they create, we call it animalic, which is rather ironic. The whole idea that musk is an animalic note is kind of strange, because if you've never smelled musks and you smell, let's say, muscinone, which is one of these 5 musks I have here, which is considered the most animalic, frankly, I don't see what's animalic about it. It's a wonderful smell. And it's very distinctive and it's just wonderful. But it's not animalic. So natural musk from musk deer has been used for centuries in fragrance, and it performs 3 different functions. One, it has a smell. They vary quite a bit from one to the other, but there's a background which is the musky character. Number two, they act as fixatives. So these are big molecules. They're at the upper edge of what we can smell. And they stick to your skin and they help other fragrance materials stick to them. And therefore they delay the evaporation of the fragrance. The third aspect of musks, which is very important for perfumery, is a weird effect that they have on fragrance, which is akin to the effect that varnish has on paintings. Doesn't really change the colors. It's completely transparent, but it somehow deepens and makes them more intense. It increases color saturation, decreases the attention that you may pay to small details, and sort of clears the way to the deeper parts of the fragrance. It's a very mysterious effect, but nevertheless self-evident. When you smell even a very quiet musk in a composition, it has this wonderful 3D effect, which we can't really explain yet. So the history of synthetic musks is really rather wonderful. And like many things in chemistry, it starts with an accident. The man called Bauer, who in the late 1880s is making explosives. Chemistry has always been known for two things: smells and bangs. Now he was making bangs, and in order to make bangs, he was making derivatives of benzene with nitro groups attached. A nitro group contains an O2, it's NO2. And each nitro group, when heated or when compressed violently, releases some of that oxygen, which begins a chemical reaction and basically burns the benzene extremely rapidly. So he was basically trying to make a better TNT, trinitrotoluene, which was and still is a reference explosive. TNT is not a particularly good explosive. It needs a lot of push to actually explode, so it's often mixed with other things like ammonium nitrate and so on. But anyway, at the time when Bauer was working on this, he was trying to make a better explosive. So he was nitrating benzene rings, and he noticed that one of the things he produced was a lousy explosive, but smelled great, and in fact smelled of musk. He should be really given credit for this, because if you've ever smelt the type of musk that he invented, called the nitro musk, it's not immediately obvious when you smell the stuff that this is going to revolutionize perfumery. First of all, you have to know what a musk character is. So full credit to Bauer for realizing that this was in fact the character of natural musk. Secondly, you have to imagine that something that smells as relatively as weakly as the nitro musks, they come as solids, can be important in perfumery. Anyway, so he stopped making explosives, and he built a company making these famous nitro musks, and they were absolutely wonderful because they were lousy explosives, which is a good thing, quite decently powerful musk materials. They had all the required properties: the odor character, a fixative effect, and this strange varnish effect that I've described. They could be made in ton quantities very cheaply. Now, if you talk to perfumers these days, they all talk about the nitro musks, which no longer are used, at least in Europe, with great nostalgia, because they smelled absolutely fantastic. They had a smooth, powdery effect. If you smell a vintage sample of the great Fabergé perfume Brut, the sweetness, the creamy sweetness of Brut is really largely due to the fact that it contains a big slug of nitro musks. And in fact, you can still get nitro musks in many parts of the world. I remember I contacted an Indian firm to send me some samples of nitro musks, and they obligingly sent a kilo of each of the nitro musks that they made. So big chunks of crumbly, friable powder in blocks. They may be lousy explosives, but I don't particularly fancy having 3 kilos even of a lousy explosive in a package sent to me. If you touch them and then you go through airport security and they swab your hands or your computer and they put it in a machine, that machine detects nitro compounds. And so if you've been touching nitro musks, there's a decent chance that they will think that you've been handling explosives. And this happened to a perfumer friend of mine who told me that he'd just been in India and he'd, just for old time's sake, he'd smelt a lot of nitros. And they took the plane and they stopped him and they searched him high and low. And he is tremendously classy. He's not your standard image of the terrorist. And he had to work quite hard to convince him, the police, to let him go and get on the plane. Eventually, nitro musks were banned because one of the effects of putting nitro groups on a benzene molecule is that you shift the ultraviolet absorption almost into the visible, actually close to the visible range, which means they have a fair amount of photochemistry and it's not a great idea to put them on the skin. They also have supposedly neurotoxic effects, although one has to question whether you would ever see them at the kind of concentrations that are used in perfumery. So in the 1920s, many chemists started studying the chemical properties of natural musks. It's clear, at least must have been clear even to them at the time, that the musk deer are unlikely to use nitro compounds simply because nitro compounds are very rare in nature. And instead, it turned out that they used macrocycles, so rings of carbons joined up with either a keto group, a C double bond O, or an ester linkage, C double bond O, and those are the olides, or actually, and remarkably, a pyridine, a 6-membered ring with a nitrogen at the top, muscopyridine. So then the question for synthetic organic chemists, of course, they love to set themselves problems that are preferably tricky, was how to make them. And the reason it's really hard to make a musk is that imagine you have a molecule of the requisite length that could, in principle, close and make a ring. Well, if you put lots of those molecules close to one another, they're going to close by joining up with another dude, head to tail, not by closing up on itself. It's much easier for it to find a neighbor and connect than it is to close on itself. So this is a major problem. That means that if you're going to make a molecule that way by making a chain with the right ends and then hope that it'll close, then you have to do it in a very dilute solution so that the next molecule is miles away. And that means that you have a huge 3 cubic meter reactor with only a small concentration of the stuff to make sure it joins with itself and not with the neighbors. And that is an extremely inefficient process because you're working with small quantities in big reactors, so it's expensive. So this was a major problem, but it led to good syntheses of very small amounts of these musks. So most of the work was carried out by a famous Nobel Prize winning Croatian-born chemist called Ružička, and he got the Nobel in 1939 for his work on macrocyclic musks. He discovered in particular one reaction which was crucial to the actual synthesis of the real natural musk deer musks, which is the elimination of the oxygen from the ring. If you can make an ester, and that's an olide, but then you have to kick out that oxygen, and the reaction that he became famous for uses a thorium catalyst to somehow get rid of that oxygen and close the ring and give you a proper ketone. So muscone, muscinone, those compounds, terrific. Terrific smell, beautiful. It's such an irony that this wonderfully clean, perfumey smell should end up being called animalic. There's another way of doing it, which is to do it in 2 parts. Half of the ring with the same functionality on the end, and the other half with the complementary functionality. So instead of hoping that a ring will close, you're hoping that two molecules will react together to make the ring. This process is every bit as prone to going the wrong way and making long chains as the one I described before. And in fact, the making of the long chains was enormously important also for synthetic chemistry and industrial chemistry, because those are called polymers. And the first of such polymers was nylon. Nylon was discovered by a really remarkable man, and his remarkable boss, to be fair, at DuPont. The name of the chemist who discovered it was Wallace Carruthers. The game with nylon is to encourage the process that makes these long chains form so that you can make actually long fibers. Carruthers, whose job description, by the way, at DuPont appears to have been to pursue such things as may be of interest, which is the most wonderful job description I think I've ever heard. He decided to try and make musks by depolymerization, and he systematically studied a series of such depolymerized chains, and he came up with a diester of a long chain acid called brassilic acid, and it's called ethylene brassylate, and it is a very famous musk, not least because it was marketed by DuPont. I think this is the only time DuPont went into fragrance chemistry, as astrotone. Astrotone was a famous synthetic musk. It's still used. It has a sour, fruity character on top of the musky aspect. And it's really absolutely extraordinary to my mind that you can buy a macrocyclic musk these days for, I don't know, $25 a kilo? $25 a kilo is mind-blowing. I mean, that's almost like this is the price that we in the lab pay for good high-quality alcohol. It's not like other branches of fine chemistry where you can make things and sell them expensive. If you have, for example, a drug where a milligram costs 10 cents or 1/100th of a dollar, then a kilo would cost $10,000. In perfume chemistry, you can't sell something for $10,000 synthetic. I think the more expensive synthetics are like $500-600 a kilo. But the fact that people can make macrocyclic musks and sell them for $25 a kilo is absolutely astonishing. And to do so, they use a variety of reaction schemes about which, to be honest, I don't know much because I'm not actually in a fragrance company, and if I were, I couldn't tell you what they were because they'd probably be trade secrets. But I've seen some published work on the reactions, and some of them are really quite something. I mean, there's one reaction called the Story synthesis, named after the person who invented it, where you basically make a macrocyclic ring from peroxides. You have cyclohexanes attached to peroxide, OO, 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 and from this triperoxide, you fuse and you make a macrocycle. Now, every chemist working even on a gram scale knows perfectly well that peroxides are bad news because they are unstable. The oxygen wants to get out and explode and combine with the rest of your stuff. These people are using, or possibly were, I'm not sure if they still do, are using a peroxide reaction on a ton scale. So in the next lecture, I will deal with another chapter of the history of musks, which is the invention, rise to prominence, and slow disappearance of what are called polycyclic musks, which were the mainstay of musks for many, many years, and the rise, more recent, of the alicyclic musks, which are completely different, completely unexpected structures, which also have a musk odor.